Welcome to Voyage Fromage, February. This is always sort of these first couple months of the year are always sort of a tough one to get like a solid theme of what we're going to do because starting the year, we want to start the year fresh. We want to do something a little bit different. And we have to sort of look ahead and say what we don't want to combine or add a cheese now that we might do later. So what we've done, we've decided to do sort of a mountain theme. And mountain theme is a pretty varied theme in terms of cheese production, and cheese eating and cheese making and all of that. So there's going to be we're gonna straddle the line of what that means a little bit. So I hope we have fun. The cheeses are fantastic. If you were able to have the Riesling that we suggested, fantastic. If not, which I don't have, I have a different Riesling. Or sorry, I have a different white wine. I'm drinking. I'll test from the Savoie, another mountain wine. Whatever it is, if you're drinking wine, have fun with it. We're not worried about specific pairings on this one, so please, by any means, have fun with the wine. I will say this, another thing, if you have any questions, can't hear me or want me to repeat something, please sort of speak up. My laptop is down. I'm working off a phone, so I'm not sure if I can see all the things. So Morgan, while you're watching, if somebody wants to chime in, please cut me off, stop me, whatever. I will, every now and then I will definitely stop and try to ask questions or see who wants to respond. So please don't be shy. We always want to have fun. And this is a nice way to spend an hour on a Friday evening eating cheese. So, and again, hopefully drinking wine. So cheers to everybody. We will get this started. So, first off, again, we're doing a mountain theme. Now, a mountain theme for cheese can be sort of, we can go a lot of directions with this. There's a lot of phrases that you'll hear, Alpine, Alpage, Montagne in France, Montagne. All these phrases sort of allude to the same thing. And before we start tasting, I want to give sort of a brief introduction into what that might mean and why we're tasting what we're tasting. So mountain cheeses, Alpine cheeses, Alpage cheeses, all these are sort of related and not related at the same time. So when we say mountain cheeses, it's a broad category. And what we chose today specifically, I feel, are cheeses that are, well, they're made either in higher out in the mountains, slightly higher elevations, as well as higher plateaus, but definitely mountain related. And mountain, a lot of definitions, right? We're not talking about 12,000-foot peaks. We're not necessarily talking about even 7,000-foot peaks. These are cheeses that are made slightly higher elevations. So, for example, the Tome de Montagne, our first cheese that we're going to taste, these cows are grazing at about, I think it's 1,200 meters. So, actually, no, sorry, a little bit less, about 900 meters. So, almost 3,000 feet, right? Which is not nothing, but at the same time, it's not the cheese that's made at 7,000 feet or 8,000 feet. That being said, they're still alpine, they're still mountain. The grasses that these animals are feeding on are going to be very different from the grasses they would be eating in the valley at a lower elevation. So the one common theme in this is that when these animals, when these cows or sheep go into higher elevations, when they go into places that are not sort of quote unquote normal, for lack of a better word, they're eating grasses, they're eating flowers and vegetation that's specific. And while it's unique to each region, all of those factors will go into play into what we're eating, the flavor, the end flavor, the profile, even in some respects, how these cheeses are treated. So, again, it's sort of a brief just sort of a brief idea of what we're doing. We're not having these are cheeses that sort of fall into the category of Alpine, which like your Comtés, Raclette fall into. they're not necessarily all quote unquote alpine. So we're gonna have fun with this. Again, they're all made in mountains or mountainous regions and areas, so we'll have fun. Now, to begin, let's start by tasting cheese because that's really what we're here to do. Now, the first cheese we're going to be tasting is the Tome de Montagne, right? If everybody has it, this is sort of the wedge that has a real sort of funky rind, a little bit of holes or a little bit of eyes, if you will, in the middle, slightly yellowish in color. Now, I decided to start with this, even though it's a little bit stronger than the others, partly because it's one aged a little bit younger, made in a way that I feel needs to be started earlier rather than later. And also the photos that we sort of gathered, I feel sort of give a wonderful idea of what's going on with cheese. So first and foremost, taste the cheese. Go ahead. Don't be shy. I don't want anybody to not eat cheese. I think that's why we're doing this. It's not just to learn. We want to eat some cheese. Let's all admit it. So anyway, so a very quick story about Tome de Montagne because it's an interesting story. It's interesting how it's made, and how we sort of stumbled into it. It was something that we should have been bringing it for years, and we didn't. So Tome de Montagne is made in the Savoie area in France. And the Savoie, if you ever get a chance to go, or if you've been, it's really amazing. This is the Alps of France. So when you go into the Savoie, it starts sort of very low, and you start climbing into these hills, into these mountains, and it's these beautiful pastures, high mountain pastures, and then all of a sudden you will see these massive peaks. Mont Blanc is not far behind this. It's really, really stunning. And the main there's two main cheeses that are made in this area: Reblochon, which you may have heard about, and then Tome de Savoie. Now, Tome de Savoie is interesting because it's a cheese. It's everybody makes the exact same style of cheese. The recipes might vary slightly in terms of temperatures of how high they actually cook the curds to, how small, or these very, very little differences. But for the most part, it's all the same cheese. Well, this couple that we buy our Tome de Savoie from also make this cheese called Tome de Montagne. So about a year and a half ago, visiting the farm, Sophie and Henri introduced this. We're talking. They introduced you with cheese. And they're like, "Oh, this is the Montagne cheese." They're like, "It's not Alpage, it's just Montagne." And the difference in that is that Alpage is a very high elevation. For them, Montagne just means higher than where they're at. And their farm sits at about 600, 700 meters. And what they do during the summer is an old tradition. It's called transhumance. Transhumance is bringing animals from the low valleys to a higher elevation during the summertime. And this is traditionally done when the snows have melted and you can bring them. So generally about mid-May, and then ending sometime in September. So these X amount of cows, or for them, for Henri and Sophie, they bring about half their herd up into these higher mountain higher mountain fields. And so all summer long, these cows are eating grasses, flowers, different vegetation that's really particular to this area. It's a higher elevation than it is in the lower area. So all they do is eat this. The cows happen to be milked while they're in the higher elevation. The cheese is made up there, and then it's brought down and aged below. So we never had this before. We have their Tome de Savoie. We always loved it. It was so different. It was so unique that one had to bring it in. Sort of fell in love with it immediately. Also fell in love with Sophie and Henri immediately as well. They're wonderful people. There's a video of them bringing the cows out, and there's a video of Henri flipping cheeses. There's both of those. as well as, and the reason, so that's the cows being brought out. So these are a mix of Swiss brown cows, Montbéliard. They have several different kinds, and they have a couple Holstein, which I did not see, but they have them. Um, and the reason they bring all these cows, or they have a varying herd, is that they feel that each breed brings different aspects. So Holstein brings sorry to pause here. This is what this valley and area looks like. So um, there are these high mastiffs and plateaus behind. It's open grassland in front and everything. And honestly, the sky is that blue all the time, or as long as you can see it. There's a lot of rain there as well. But so if you can ever go, please go. But that's just a wonderful sort of view of what this feels like when you go. So those cows that you just saw were being led into the pastures to feed, and those were not the specific cows that made this cheese because, as I said, they bring their other cows to a higher elevation. So where we were at, again, about 700 meters, and they bring their cows about another 300 to 400 meters higher than that, and those cows will stay there all summer long, and it does its thing. So what's interesting about this cheese, or there's a lot of interesting things about this cheese. One is the flavor is a little funky, a little strong, but it doesn't have the typical flavors of this region and area, which are really, really farmy and grassy. This is a sort of actually, I take it back. This is grassy. It's not as farmy as a lot of these cheeses can be. It's really interesting. There's a little bit of black pepper and a little bit of actually bell pepper in this as well, which is sort of unique to these wheels, but it varies every time. This cheese was made in, I believe when I got it, or sorry, when I got the email when it was made, this cheese was made in August, sort of right towards the end of the summer, when the grasses are starting to dry just a little bit. There's a little, while there's a lot of water, a lot of rain after that, the grasses are not quite as green as you would get in July and June. And so that grassy flavor tends to get a little bit dry as compared to sort of fresh. And that's sort of what I'm seeing in this one as well. It's a really, really interesting cheese. Now, if you go to the Savoie and you look for Tome de Montagne, there might be other people who make it, but it will be different every single time you get it because there's no designation and there's no sort of idea of what that means. So this is their interpretation of what a Tome de Montagne can be. Their Tome de Savoie, as I mentioned earlier, is the same as everybody else. Sorry, same as everybody else's, although better. Same recipe. This is just a unique cheese in the way it's made. They don't change their recipe a ton, but because the milk is so different than what you get from the cows who are in the lower elevation, it becomes a different cheese altogether. Now, you will notice, this is always sort of fun facts, you will notice that on the rind, it is pockmarked and very rough. So this is for a couple of reasons. The rind of this is what is called a natural rind. So when they make this cheese, they put it in brine for a little bit to get the salt into it and to help dry the rind. And then they put it in caves and they let it age for, I think they age the cheese for about 3 or 4 weeks, and then they send it to another cave for the afternoon to finish it. What happens in their cave is two things. Is they let molds grow on it and they let mites get into it. So the molds that grow on it are called, it's called mucor is the real word. Poil de chat is the better word. That's the French word that means cat hair. And they let these molds grow on this cheese that sort of cover it and engulf it. And poil de chat does nothing to the inside of the cheese, but it affects the outside. But what they do, they let this mold grow, and it's these little fine little hairs, and they'll grow. I mean, I've seen them as high as like 2 inches, but they let them grow. They keep patting them down, and as it pats down, it sort of covers and helps create this natural rind. So what is going on here on the outside? It's exactly the same as the inside, with the exception that the molds have sort of grown over it, and the salt that's been there has sort of protected it. So it is so different. While it's edible, if you want to try the rind, go right ahead. I don't think it's particularly. It doesn't add to the flavor, overall flavor, but it is edible. Go right ahead. So it protects the inside, so the inside will be nothing like the outside, and it helps sort of as it ages because of that rind, where it will age basically the same from inside to out. So while it tastes a little bit stronger towards the rind, it's not significantly so. But it's such an interesting cheese, and again, unique. You will not see this. You won't see this much in France. You won't barely see. I don't know if anybody else imports anything like this in the U.S., but nobody has this in France, with the exception of people being in the Savoie. So it's a unique cheese for us and for you, and for France as well. So I hope you enjoy it. It's kind of a fun little cheese to start with. Now, any thoughts, any questions about that? No, we're all good. Did people like the cheese? I know it's a funky cheese.
Talked off.
I don't know.
You're on.
No, I really enjoyed it. A little bit of salt was nice.
Yeah, it's a little. Well, this. So when we get this fresh, the salt is not quite as prevalent. We got this in December, and so to me, the salt has gotten a little bit more than I would like. If you were to say, when is this cheese at perfection? It would be a little less salty, but I like the salt in it, definitely.
Yeah.
It's definitely a lot of fun. Now, how is this? Is anybody drinking the wine that we suggested, or similar wine, or just any wine with it? And is that working with it as well?
We're drinking a red, believe it or not.
No,
But it's
actually, I
fine.
believe no, that makes a lot of sense. This is a cheese that actually can hold up to a lot of red. So I get it.
France.
Yeah, Medoc.
Yeah, we're
Good,
drinking
good.
champagne with it.
Oh,
You know what? Drink champagne with everything. I think we're good.
Yep. No, the cheese is great. We're enjoying it.
Want a little bit of wine?
Good.
We're doing the
Morgan, do you
cheese
have the
blend
video of
here.
the? Do you have the slide of the video of them turning the cheese?
Yeah, one sec.
So just to sort of before we move on to the next cheese here, to give an idea. Oh, was that quick? So this cheese that they're turning, I'm sorry that video is so quick. The cheese that they're turning, literally they were making it while we were there. The cheese sat for about 30 seconds, or sorry, about 2 minutes, and it formed immediately, and they were flipping it. It's a really fascinating process. So if you ever get a chance to go watch cheese making, please do. It's such an interesting and fascinating thing to watch. The next cheese we're going to be tasting is called Lyol. Right? Lyol is a really fascinating cheese for so many reasons. And one of them is that when you talk about history of cheese, and it plays such a prominent role that people don't really know. So in the history of cheese in Europe specifically, not going back to the origins, the Romans, the Greeks, and then the Romans were particularly important in this. And the Romans spread cheese technology throughout their empire. While cheese was more than likely, and we have some evidence of it, that it was made in the British Isles long before the Romans. Really, cheese was not a big thing in Europe until the Romans started spreading it. So one of the things that they did was they brought the idea and the technology and the recipes of making pecorino romano and Parmesan, which are similar. They're very different, but there's similarities in the way they're made. They brought those technologies into Europe. And one of the places where the Romans sort of settled in a place where they could make cheese was an area that we call the Auvergne. The Auvergne Mastiff, this high plateau, is almost dead center in France. And it's an area, this Mastiff is fairly high elevation. Several, a couple, I think the Mastiff tops off at about maybe 1,500 meters. But in any case, the mountains around it are these volcanic mountains. They are really interesting. It's a different landscape. Grasses are different. Feed is different. The soil's different. And cows had been brought into this area by the Romans, by the Iberian tribes from even before the Romans. Anyways, cows really did well in this area, and a couple breeds in particular really caught on. One was called Solares, which is still in existence today, which has a relative in Spain, or sorry, the Iberian Peninsula. Another is called Cantal, and actually then the third is called Aubrac. And Aubrac, which is what we're going to focus on, is a cow, has big horns, it has red fur. It's unique to this area. I don't believe that it is raised anywhere else other than the Auvergne, but it took really well to the soil, to the grasses, to the land. And when the Romans started teaching cheese making, or started making cheese in this area, and again, we're talking almost 2,000 years ago, when they did this, they took the recipes that they had, Pecorino Romano. And to make Pecorino Romano, you cut the curds a certain way, really small, you age it a certain amount of time, and you let it go. Well, to make cheese here in the Auvergne area, they started cutting corners. And what I mean by that is they maybe didn't cut the curds quite as small. They didn't necessarily press it quite as long. Then they didn't age it quite as long. So other cheeses were essentially born out of this. And one of those cheeses is Laiol. So Laiol is sort of small village, a small area within the Auvergne that the cheese is named after. But this cheese has been made in this area for, again, basically since the Roman times, in almost exactly the same manner. So this is a wheel, and it looks almost exactly like a wheel of Pecorino Romano. It's about, about 2 feet tall. It's about 18 inches diameter. It's this massive wheel, and it's always been like this. I think that video shows a pretty good view of it. If you want to show that again, Morgan. If you see this, that's an 80-pound wheel of cheese, and it has been made essentially in this form for years. So again, this is made with the Aubrac cow, and the Aubrac is a breed that's particularly here that started to die off because at this point in time, there's only one producer of this cheese. And Laiol cheese, there's a cooperative that makes it. It's called June de Montagne. And there are, I believe, 12 to 15 farmers who raise these cows, who milk them, and all the milk that they make goes into making this one cheese. And so it's unique to this. If you ever get a chance to go to the Auvergne, it's a really special area. I don't know that I've ever seen anything quite like it. It's mountainous at the same time. It's these big, very open plains and grasslands that while they don't look like plains from the U.S., they just don't look like French mountains. It's really unique. And these cows produce this milk that is really, really high in fat, high in protein, high in mineral. It's really interesting. But the Laiol production sort of is unique in itself. One, Aubrac cows only. So the milk ends up, and this cheese ends up with this very unique flavor. And one of the calling cards of the Aubrac cow is that there's a little bit of acidity in the milk, and you get this in the cheese. And so when I taste this cheese, it's always interesting when I taste the cheese, because I think I always think it's going to be a little bit different than it is, and it isn't, for whatever that means. Take it for what it is. It is always a little bit acidic, but I always get it's so fresh at the same time. And so what this cooperative and these cheesemakers are able to do is keep a tradition going over all these years, and at the same time sort of be innovative enough to keep it fresh. And what I mean by that is they don't change the recipes. What they do, though, is they have worked with the farmers to make sure that the feed is correct, that the grasses are correct, when the animals are taken in, when they're left out. They are starting to use science in a way that most of these traditional producers just don't have a chance to do, and they're very good at it. So to me, this is a great example of not only tradition, but we're eating something that's pretty close to what Roman soldiers were eating in France in, the year 200. And it sort of remains the same. The flavor profile only changes when the milk changes, and that's about it. Does anybody have questions about this cheese? Curious about it?
I have a question. It tastes a little like Gruyere to me.
So interesting. I would say, for me personally, in the beginning, I kind of get a little bit of that. To me, the finish is so different. The finish is where that acid comes up. Use the word sour, I don't think is the right word, because sour and acid sort of have a similarity. But the funk sort of comes in the end, and it has a finish at Gruyere. To me, the finish is where the difference really happens. If you want to say up front, I'm not going to disagree, but to me, the finish is really, really different.
Yeah, I get that as well.
Yeah, but it's fun. It's interesting. Texture is wonderful. It's great. So this is great on its own. Great with white wine. Great with red wine, which not every cheese is this. I think this is particularly good. It's also really wonderful. There's a dish made in this area called aligot, not to be confused with the wine from Burgundy, the white wine called aligoté. Aligot is a dish of mashed potato and cheese. It's everybody has their version, particularly in the French mountains. What they do, though, is they take potatoes that have been mashed, riced, and they add copious amounts of cheese. I've seen recipes where it's upwards of 50% potato, 50% cheese, and it's mixed, and it's really amazing thing. This cheese is particularly good, wonderful with it. Particularly if you go through the painstaking process of making sort of the Robuchon style potatoes. But these potatoes, you mix these potatoes with this cheese. You have to mix it for a certain amount of time. If you look at recipes, it's pretty amazing. You look at recipes, you mix it for a certain amount of time, and you get these long pulls of potato and cheese, and it's really like nothing else. There are other cheeses that might work, but flavor profile with Lyol and potato is really like nothing else. It's something that if you like potato and cheese, I would really highly encourage you to sort of look into the recipes and try to figure it out. It's a lot of fun, and it's delicious. It's not quite like having fondue and potato mixed together, but it's pretty close. It's pretty close.
Can you repeat the name of that for me? The name of the
called-
recipe?
Yep, it's called aligot, ALIGOT.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Really, really wonderful. You can use different cheeses. Thank you for spelling it out. You can use different cheeses. However, with these cheeses from the Auvergne, particularly the Lyol, it's it's a step above. It's really pretty amazing. It's wonderful. Um, any thoughts on this cheese? Do we like this cheese? Because I know it's a unique. Both of these are unique in flavor, but I feel this is really unique in its flavor profile. Or did anybody not like the cheese? Because that's always a curious question as well.
We're liking it. Very good.
Good.
I like the tanginess.
Isn't that interesting? It's fun, isn't it? Excellent. Sorry. So it's always hard to talk and chew cheese at the same time. All right. The next cheese that we're going to be tasting is the Raclette au Beurre. Now, this is a unique cheese for many reasons. One, because it's not technically raclette. Etienne that we buy it from calls it this to us, or he says this when we order it, when we want it. Excuse me, he calls it raclette. But he doesn't necessarily call the cheese raclette. And raclette means to scrape. It's an old, it's a term that, or for cheese, it's a term that came from the Swiss mountains, where they would have these soft cheeses that they would put over the fire and let melt and scrape off. So, sorry, not to melt, to scrape is what this means. So Etienne is a cheesemaker. He's a batch cheesemaker. He has been making cheese for, I think he's been doing it for about 20 years. He worked with his mother for years. She finally retired. He took over the business. And he is in a small village in the Pyrenees. He does work with a few farmers, but he makes most of his cheese. And so a few years ago, he decided that basically when he took over for his mother, he wanted to sort of expand his range a little bit. And one of his cheeses that he decided to do, he wanted to replicate raclette from the Savoie in France or from the Swiss Alps. He wanted to do this so bad. So he has been working on this, playing with this, toying with this recipe for a long time. Now, what's unique about this for raclette is that it's sheep milk. And most, or actually all raclette made in Texas or in the Savoie is, or I take that back. 95% of the cheese that's made in Savoie and Switzerland is called raclette is cow's milk. A very small percentage is sheep and goat, but it's so rare. Most of these farmers don't raise enough sheep or goats to really make enough of it. Well, at the end, all he raises are sheep. He buys goat's milk from somebody else, but he owns a ton of sheep and he loves to make cheese and he's really good at it. So he started playing around with this recipe, and what he came out with, which sometimes he refers to as fondant, which same word as like when he used fondant on a cake recipe or for icing. And basically he's just saying this is going to melt, and this really does melt well. But he's aging a little bit longer, and he's not technically worried about, he's not worried about this technically being like a raclette. In other words, that rind is going to be a little firmer. He's not, if you put this on a raclette machine, he wants you to eat the cheese. He doesn't care about the rind. And that's not the case with the normal raclette producer. The rind is very important to the overall flavor. He's only concerned about the paste. And so he kind of lets the rind get a little bit harder, ages a little bit longer, but he comes up with this. So the recipe to do this is very different from what he's ever done. And even from what you find, if you go into the Pyrenees where he is, you will not find many cheeses made of this ilk in this style. It's really different. It's unique to the area. So the reason we're including this as a mountain cheese isn't just because he is making this in the style of raclette, which is a mountain cheese. It is he actually does transhumanants with sheep. And this is far and few between, to be honest with you. Most people, even in the Pyrenees where it's mostly sheep and there's a lot of higher elevation, most people don't bother doing this with sheep. And I don't know why. It doesn't make sense to me. It would seem obvious to some, but apparently it's not as obvious to them. So during, in May, he brings his sheep from the village that you see the structure there. He brings his sheep from that village, which is, let me think. It's the Midi-Pyrénées. I believe he's at about 500 meters. And then he brings his sheep to about 16 or 1700 meters during the summertime. And so you end up with this really sort of unique, really great flavor. And then he comes up with his normal Brebis, the Osorati, and this cheese as well. He only makes his cheese during the summer. He doesn't make it during all year round. He just feels it's better. So in this cheese, with a little bit of age included, you get these really particular flavors. And if you ever go to the Pyrenees are very interesting in that they have a very low tree line. So where these sheep are grazing is, even though it's only about 1,500 meters, there's no trees. It's all flat. It's all sort of just mountain grasses and flowers, and that's it. I guess if you've ever watched the Tour de France and they do Pyrenees runs in the mountains, you'll get a good sense of what this is. And the terrain where this are, it's very, very rocky. Again, with very little trees. It's pretty stunning. So with that, during the summer, it's a little hotter. And so instead of getting sort of, to me, like a clean, like fresh grass, this is a little bit hotter in a way. If that, I hope that word makes sense in this. In that it's not bright vegetation. It's muted and a little hotter. Think your tomato when it's super ripe in September and not in August, right? Where the heat's gotten to a little bit. And this cheese also melts really well. Now, what's interesting is at the end, when he took over for his mother, also makes jams. And a brief little side about that is that where he ages his cheese was actually the home of one of the musketeers. So if we're all familiar with the story of the Three Musketeers, they were part of they're essentially they're French lore at this point, but they were also based on real people. And in their village, there was the musketeer named Porthos. And that is his chateau. So right behind this building is a chateau where Porthos lived. And that chateau is where they actually age all of these cheeses. It's pretty impressive and it's pretty interesting. He makes jam as well, and a few other cheeses, but he's a really, really interesting person. Makes great cheeses and is very, very passionate about what he does. So, I hope you enjoy sort of the unique quality of this, because you will not see a sheep's milk cheese made like this pretty much anywhere else. It's very, very unique. What are our thoughts on this cheese?
We like it.
We like it. Good. Really, that's all. That's mostly what I'm concerned about. Any questions about that cheese?
I don't have any questions. I just thought it was super mild compared to the last two.
I would say, to me, that mild, yes. To me, though, more complex. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
Like, I find that to me, the Lyol has a lot going on, but I'll use music as a way to describe this. The Lyol, to me, has a few notes and it's good. Those notes are on repeat and they're good. Whereas the Raclette has bigger scales and bigger notes and a lot more going on within it. So even though it's a slightly milder cheese, it's a more complex cheese. And I get way more flavor profiles out of it than even with the Lyol. And I don't mean to downplay the Lyol at all, because I think there's a lot going on. But I get a little bit more from the Raclette specifically. So, sorry, chew again. So then the last cheese we're going to talk about is called Le Fortin. Le Fortin is a cheese that it's made by one person, and it is made exclusively for the Appenor that we work with in Switzerland, which I don't divulge the name of at this point in time, just because nobody else works with them. Sorry about that. So this cheese, we are the only people who bring it in. You're the only people who see it. And the people we buy it from are the only people who have it as well. Now, Le Fortin gets its name from the fort where it originally is aged in. So it's made by, again, a farmer that is sort of, where is this located? The area is north of Lake Geneva. When you go over, it's called the Jamont Pass, and you go right into the Vaud area, right into the Gruyere, Fribourg area. And so these are, again, higher alpine areas. This farm sits at, I believe, 1,500 meters, and all the cows, basically summertime, are all only grazing on alpine, and wintertime are only eating hay that's from alpine grasses. So it's basically high elevation all the time. So you get this really unique flavor from that. It's a small farm that raises really only, I believe, Swiss brown with some Montbéliard mixed in, but basically they're Swiss brown cows. The Swiss brown cows, which is what most of the milk for Gruyere comes from, are really, really rich in fats and proteins. They're wonderful for making alpine cheeses that melt well, etc. So Fortin sort of falls into that. So basically, the Appenor that we work with in Switzerland tries to work with these small farms to, one, not just sell their cheese and work with them that they do their traditional thing, but also work with them to expand and go beyond. So when they went to the small farm and said, we want a new cheese, they developed this. So Fortin is made similarly to Gruyere. Again, all these recipes are slightly different. Obviously, it's a smaller format, not aged quite as long. But they sort of tweaked a few things. Instead of brining it for 18 hours, they brine it for a shorter amount of time. So while there's a salt in this, it's not as salty as Gruyere. Because of the grasses, because high elevation, you get that different flavor profile. And because of the animals and the grasses, you get a richer, heavier sort of feel than most Gruyères. So it gets its name Le Fortin because when this cheese is made, after a couple of weeks, it goes to a fort that is located in the mountains in Switzerland. So this little picture here, there's two pictures. There's one of cheeses on one side and a tunnel with stairs going down next to it. It's hard to tell from that photo when you're looking at this tunnel going down, and it goes down about 200 meters, and it is all rock. It's all built out of the mountain, and it goes straight down and goes to another fort next door. There are these forts that were built in World War II or during World War II by the Swiss government and Swiss Army. Even though they were neutral, they still built forts that are all connected and they basically they're for protection. They're not basically this fort housed a lot of people. There were gun turrets, but it was really just because during World War II everybody's a little bit afraid, and the Swiss, if anything happens, they're prepared. They're ready to go. So the Swiss government builds all these forts that go through all the mountains. The story is that they're all connected from, the Italian border all the way up to the German border. I don't know if that's true, but I've seen how far this tunnels go in this fort that I've been in. Down, I've been up. I walked with one of the people that we work with. We walked up about 500 meters into mostly dark. We had lights just to sort of see upstairs. It's all stairs, and it goes to another mountain. They don't know where that goes. So when the Swiss government decided they no longer needed this or these forts, they decided to destroy them, but they offered them to the public to buy. And so a lot of cheese affineurs, a lot of people who ate cheese decided to sort of buy into this. And our affineur is one of these people. So when you drive by this, if you were to drive by this cave, you would be driving by on a curve and you wouldn't know it was there. It's camouflaged so that you wouldn't see it. And in other words, there's rock. There's rock painted on rock, and there's tarp painted on that, so it looks like rock. And there's a small door when you go in. And if you go into this fort, it's really fascinating because you see all the workrooms. Where the showers were. You can see where the bunks were. You see the turrets, and you walk into this thing. Again, you walk down these tunnels to go to another one. It's really interesting, and they have only outfitted what they're able to do at a time. So where you see those cheeses on the right, excuse me, they have figured out this area, but there are parts of this fort that they own that they have barely even touched because one, it's time. It's money, and it's time to get in and revamp them. So the name Fortan just comes from this. It's really interesting. So the Fortan, and I really, really do like this wheel, or these wheels that we're getting in particular. They were really interesting. Is just a unique and fascinating Alpine cheese. It's really wonderful. I don't feel that this is necessarily stronger than the last ones. I just feel that to end, this is the perfect cheese to end with. I feel it's so balanced, and it's so I don't know, it's ready, and it's right, and it's good to go. What are we tasting in this? What are our thoughts on this cheese? Do we like it?
Yes.
Good.
Very nice. Little nutty.
Yeah, it's a little nutty, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, interesting. I always talk to. I love to ask this question: what kind of nuts are we tasting in this?
Oh, wow.
When I first took a bite, I sort of smelled coffee, and then I looked at the little card, and it said roasted onion.
Yeah. It's interesting. So I would actually. It's funny. I would take, and I think this is a wonderful cheese to do this with, where you talk about flavor profiles, and because to me the cheeses of this ilk, this is similar-ish to Gruyere, to Comté. The flavor wheel on this is excessive. There's so many things. Roast onions. To me, I get the coffee. To me, but it's like a light coffee. It's not a dark coffee.
Right.
Very, very light roast, if you will. But there's also like a little bit of sweetness, just a tinge of sort of lactic dairy in this as well, where even though there's a little bit of age, to me that little fresh note sort of comes in at the very end, which I really like. It's pretty fantastic.
I was going to say, as far as not like, I was getting cashews, and maybe it's some of that sweetness coming forward in
Yeah.
that. I think.
Cashew is a good one. Roasted cashew, specifically. Like, yeah, I mean, Yeah, I get it. Well, it coats the fattiness of this like a cashew, sort of. It really coats the mouth. It's really delicious. Mm. And again, white or red wines we are great with. And if you're drinking beer, while all of these are pretty good with beer, I think this in particular, you have a stronger beer with this. It's really good. It's a fun pairing. I'm not a beer drinker, but never discount beer with cheese. It's a wonderful combination. Good, wonderful. So that concludes our tasting. Does anybody have any questions, not sure, or comments about what we tasted, or just in general, cheese in general? I can answer those as well. Oh, can you put up the last slide, Morgan? Thank you. So I wanted to share this with everybody. I don't know if everybody gets to the combination. This is only because, one, it's fun, and to me, it's a good reminder that what we do with cheese is serious business, and I love it and all this. It's playful and it's fun. And several years ago, visiting Switzerland, I was in a small town. The cheese shop there was closed, but this display sitting in front of it was a bunch of Barbie dolls with the Miss Fromage contest. And all of these dolls have specific Swiss cheeses on them. There's an MC, there's the animals next to it. It's playful, it's fun, and it's one of the things I kind of forgot about because this was several years ago when I saw this, that I just kind of want to remind everybody that whatever we do at the end of the day, really it's about having fun and enjoying it. And really that's what I want you guys to do. So one, I hope you've enjoyed it. Again, if you have any questions, please ask or email Morgan and pass them on, whatever it is. I'm always happy to talk and talk about cheese, answer questions, or just whatever. It's good.
This was
This
wonderful.
was our
Thank you.
first one. We really enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you, David.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. They're all a little bit different, and it's funny. I said something earlier, and I'm like, I think I said that a while back. So if they ever become repetitive, I'm sorry, but we really try. I mean, it's cheese, and at the end of the day, it's just about having fun and enjoying yourself. It's food, right?
That was great.
Good. Well, excellent. Thank you all so much for joining me. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the cheese as you go. Hope there's enough for you guys to try it with other things. Don't share with your friends. Keep it for yourself. You get other cheese for your friends. But thank you guys so much.